Good morning, America. I'm Madeline Beckham, and welcome back to today's show. There is great news on this fine Friday as we learn that the math team scandal has been put to rest, as Elijah Baker is finally behind bars after being tried and convicted of removing innocent citizen Tristan Sanford's name off of the Harrison High School Mu Alpha Theta roster. It is certainly refreshing to see justice being served on behalf of Tristan after the social media campaign Justice for Tristan took Twitter by storm, keeping Tristan in our thoughts this morning as he recovers from such a gross obstruction of justice. More on that story later. It is now time to reveal our December GMA Book Club pick. Let's go live now to Virginia Young and Lou Daniels, who will be sitting down with the author to learn more about this month's book.
Hi, and good morning to you too, Madeline. We are so excited to announce this month's pick, The Vanishing Half.
Yes, Gracie. Looking well beyond issues of race, this book considers the lasting influence of the past as it shapes a person's decisions, desires, and expectations. It explores some of the multiple reasons and realms which people sometimes feel pulled to live as something other than their origins.
Couldn't have said it better myself, Lou. Today we have the opportunity to speak with Brit's editor, Sarah McGrath, to answer some of our most pressing questions about the book and the process in which the author took to write it. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Sarah, would you mind telling us a little about this book?
Yes, The Vanishing Half is a story set in the past that addresses modern themes of racism, colorism, LGBT identity, and socioeconomic privilege. It follows the lives of two girls, both light-skinned black girls, who run away from home at the age of 16. One character, Desiree, marries a dark-skinned black man and has a child, while the other, Stella, lives her life passing as a white woman.
Sarah, as you know, the book was released in the heights of an intense cultural movement for America. How do you feel the release date and the events of the country helped the popularity of the book?
Well, actually, the book was in works for about 4 or 5 years until it was published, so it never occurred to us that it would hold a significance in society's current events, and Brit wrote with the purpose to address racism and never realized the impact it may have upon release.
I totally agree. The book starts off in the small town of Mallard. What sparked the idea of Mallard for the setting? Is it based off something from your childhood or something from your imagination?
So Brit had actually gotten the idea for the book from a conversation she had had with her mother, who told her about a town she remembered from her childhood in Louisiana where everyone sort of intermarried so that their children would get lighter with each generation. And so she wanted to kind of explore that idea of a place like this. And so she was able to draw on some research from similar Creole communities that were similarly sort of insular and organized around people having light skin, which is where she was able to create the fictitious town Mallard that Stella and Desiree grew up in.
Wow, that's really interesting. I never really thought about that when I was reading the book, but I think that's so cool that you incorporated that. How was hearing about people finding more about their ancestry and finding out new information about their lineage? How do you feel the way passing was addressed in the book and influenced the newfound information?
So stories of passing are often these moralizing stories, and so she didn't really want to do that. So Bennet was not interested in punishing Stella or condemning her. To us, it was not interesting to think like, is it good or is it bad to pass? She was really more interested in the implications of passing on this woman's life. So, how she comes to think of herself and how this changes her relationships and her family, and so the choices she's making and how they affect her marriage. So Bennet was far more interested in that than the idea of actually trying to punish her.
An interesting character in the book, of course, was Stella, the twin who lives as a white woman. Can you explain how she must keep changing her performances of whiteness?
So for the post-civil rights movement era, Stella is learning how to perform whiteness at a time in which whiteness itself is also changing. And so the scripts that she's learned within her Jim Crow laws upbringing in Louisiana are not really applicable to when she becomes a sort of wealthy white woman over in California. So she has to perform whiteness in a different way. I think for Stella, Brit was just interested in the way that she's constantly running from her life in the past, and also the way in which she's constantly having to learn how to produce and perform her race in a different way, in a way that is often unacceptable to the other white people that she lives around.
So, usually in stories of passing, the most famous stories, the protagonists usually ultimately face society's reckoning. But in this book, Stella's never found out. What effect do you think it has on the story?
So Stella doesn't really necessarily face society's reckoning, but instead she suffers from something more subtle and enduring, which would be the hollowing out of the self. You see, Bennet was more interested in passing because of how it exposes and strengthens the artifice of race. On the one hand, you can perform whiteness, then what does it mean to be white? If you can move between these categories because you decide that you will, what does it actually mean that we have systems that are built on reinforcing those categories? And on the other hand, these characters who pass usually end up reinforcing the hierarchies that they are potentially destabilizing. So the tension within passing stories is between this idea of destabilizing race and then reaffirming race at the same time. Thank you so much for having me.
Very insightful, Sarah. And thank you again for being here today on behalf of Brit. And folks, be on the lookout for the new HBO series coming soon about the Vanishing Half. And might I say, this may be among the new generation of classic books.
Yes, Lou, I would say this GMA book club pick will definitely be one for the books. Back to you, Madeline.